I sat at the kitchen table, cradling a cup of cold coffee. The kind that had long forgotten it was meant to comfort anyone. Before me lay my latest bank statement, a clean sheet of white paper with one bold number staring back at me like a secret I had kept too long. 750. Ling. It almost looked fake. But every digit carried a memory. Every comma represented a decision. Every cent was a choice I made. Not for pleasure, but for survival and for my daughter. 24 years of quiet, steady work at Pacific Industries. I worked in the human resources department of a company that made air conditioner parts not glamorous, not headline-worthy, but stable, reliable. That's what mattered after my divorce from Richard. He disappeared from our lives when Elodie was just 12. One moment, we were a family. And the next, it was just the two of us. That's when I had to grow up again this time. As a mother with no backup plan. I remember sitting at this very table. Years ago. Flipping through investment books and budgeting spreadsheets with one eye on my daughter's homework. I stopped eating out. I cooked everything at home. I bought her school clothes at outlets and secondhand stores. We didn't take vacations. I cut corners on everything except her. She never fully understood. Why couldn't she have what her classmates had? Why couldn't we go to Disneyland like the Garcias down the street? But I had a vision that stretched further than any weekend getaway. I started with just $500 a month. Every leftover dollar after rent. Groceries. Utilities. I put it into mutual funds and stocks. I actually understood. When tech stocks soared in the late 90s, I didn't go wild. I stayed measured. When they crashed in the early 2000s, I didn't panic. I reinvested. In 2002, I sold the apartment in San Diego that Richard and I had once called home and moved us into a modest little place in Chula Vista. It wasn't flashy. Elodie was furious. New school. New friends. A downgrade in every teenage sense of the word. But I took the $300. Zero difference, and put it straight into investments. She saw a mother moving backward. I saw a future being built. Pacific Industries had a profit-sharing program. I took advantage of every dollar. I climbed the ladder from HR assistant to department head. My salary eventually hit $120. Zero a year. I never spent more than $60. Zero on living expenses. The rest, invested. Reinvested. Compound interest became my quiet best friend. And real estate in California. It played right into my hands. The $200. Zero home I bought in Chula Vista was now worth more than $500. Ling? Every choice added up. Slowly. Relentlessly. I stared back down at the bank statement. 750. Ling? It wasn't luck. It wasn't an inheritance. It was discipline. Sacrifice. And the unglamorous grind of doing what needed to be done every day. And I always knew why. I wanted Elodie to have what I never did: security. The chance to live without looking over her shoulder every month when the rent came due. A house? A place that was hers. A future that didn't feel like a tightrope walk. She and Niels, her husband of 3 years, were living in a small apartment in a rundown neighborhood. Niels earned $70. Zero a year selling auto parts. Respectable. But not enough for a down payment in this market. Not in California. Not when starter homes cost nearly $1 million. So I made a plan. A birthday surprise. A check in an envelope. I imagined the look on her face. The tears. The hug that didn't feel like an obligation. I imagined her seeing me again not as a wallet. Not as a favor machine, but as the woman who built something out of nothing. Just for her. But that was before the phone rang. Before her voice reminded me of everything that had changed. Before I realized $750. Zero might never be enough. Not to buy respect. Not to buy love. Not even from your own child. It didn't happen all at once. That's the most dangerous part. It crept in like dust, quiet. Ordinary. Almost invisible until one day. The weight of it was everywhere. It started with little things. Mom. Can I borrow your car, Mom? Can you babysit the neighbor's kid, Mom? Our kitchen's too small. Can you cook for our dinner party? There was no please. No, do you have time? Just assumptions. Tasks wrapped in the soft fabric of familial expectation. I said yes. Every time. Like a reflex. Because that's what good mothers do. Right. Niels didn't even pretend to be grateful. He'd walk into my home, nod vaguely in my direction, and plant himself on the couch. Sometimes he didn't even take off his shoes. Once, he complained that there was no beer in the fridge before saying hello. I told myself he was just tired, that they were young, that they'd learn. But deep down, I knew I was letting them treat me like an unpaid assistant in my own life. Then came the dinner. Elodie called earlier that week. We're coming over Saturday night. Make something nice. Nothing weird. Niels doesn't like surprises. That was it. Not an invitation. A directive, like I was a caterer. Not her mother. Still, I wanted it to be special. I spent nearly $100 at the market carefully picked vegetables, fresh herbs, real cream for the mashed potatoes. I marinated chicken, made apple pie from scratch using my mother's recipe. I even bought new cloth napkins because Elodie once said paper ones were cheap. The day of the dinner, I cleaned the house, lit candles, laid out the good china with the gold rims. I wore my best dress, did my makeup, and stood at the door ready to greet them like honored guests. At 7 sharp, they arrived. Elodie didn't even hug me. Her first words were, "Ugh, why is it so hot in here? Can you turn on the AC? Niels can't handle stuffy air." He walked in behind her, phone in hand. Didn't look up. Saturday on my couch like he owned it. In the kitchen, I heard them whispering. Elodie complained about the flowers. Niels is allergic. I moved the vase to my bedroom. She examined the mashed potatoes with clinical detachment. Did you mash these enough? Niels hates lumps. Niels hadn't even taken a bite. But he chimed in anyway. Yeah. Looks a little grainy. I brought rice. Then soy sauce. Then more bread. They never lifted a finger. I was up and down from the kitchen like a waitress in my own home. When I finally sat down to eat, my food was cold. Then, between bites of pie, Niels leaned back and said, "You know, your mom's cooking is good, but not like real cooking. Serious cooking." Elodie giggled. Yeah. Mom always made basic stuff. It's nothing like the tarts we had at that French cafe last week. They spoke about me like I wasn't there. Like I hadn't just spent the entire day trying to make them feel welcome. They laughed about my old dishes, my small house, my job. She's so modest. Elodie said, "She's thrifty." Niels added, like, aggressively frugal. She used to buy my clothes at thrift stores. She continued, laughing. Remember that old car you had? Mom, I was so embarrassed when you dropped me off at school. I sat still, fork in hand. That car got her to school every day. The clothes were clean, decent. I made sure of it. But now, Those sacrifices were just punchlines. And then Niels delivered the line that finally cracked something in me. She's so submissive. You ask her for something, and she just does it. No complaints. Like a helper. A helper. Not a mother. Not even a person. Just someone to make dinner and disappear when the plates are clean. They finished dessert. Thanked me without meaning it. Kissed me goodbye like they were checking a box. When I closed the door, the silence in the house screamed. I looked around at the dishes, the candles, the napkins, the wine glasses that weren't good enough. Then I looked at the number in my bank account. 750 Ling. I had given them everything, my time, my energy, my love. But somewhere along the way, I forgot to keep even a little for myself. After they left that night, I stood at the kitchen sink, staring at a pile of half-eaten food and dirty dishes that suddenly felt like evidence. Not of a meal, but of a life I had built entirely around people who no longer saw me. The pie, my mother's recipe, was barely touched. The chicken was stripped of skin and dissected like a science project. The napkins I had bought that morning were balled up and tossed on their plates, stained with sauce and disregard. My knees were aching. But I didn't sit. I couldn't. Not yet. I walked through the quiet house, pausing in the hallway where Elodie's childhood photos still hung. In one, she was 5 years old, arms wrapped around my neck, her face pressed into my cheek. Both of us laughing. I remembered that day. We had built a cardboard spaceship in the living room and pretended to visit the moon. She used to run to me after school, babbling about her day, asking if we could make pancakes for dinner. Now she ran over to assign chores. I stood in the living room and looked around as if I were a guest in my own home. Everything I owned simple. Yes, but chosen with care had been criticized, downgraded, ridiculed. My gold-rimmed plates, cheap. My dishes, plain. My taste, old-fashioned. Niels and Elodie hadn't just judged my furniture. They had judged my life. The choices I had made, sacrifices I once wore like quiet medals, had been turned into a list of shortcomings. And the worst part, they didn't even know they were doing it. It was so casual, so effortless. I walked into my bedroom, opened the drawer, and took out the bank statement again. 750 Ling. It stared up at me like a question. What is this money for them? To help them buy a house that would have a bigger kitchen than mine. A wine fridge. Imported granite countertops. A place where they'd maybe invite me once a month. Ask me to take off my shoes at the door. And then whisper behind my back about how frugal I was. I had planned to hand over that money as a gift. But what if it wasn't a gift? What if it was an apology I didn't owe? What if giving them that money would only deepen the divide? Confirm for Elodie that I was someone who existed to make her life easier. Not someone worthy of respect. What if it didn't buy us love, but simply bought me more silence, more dinner invitations that felt like summons, more judgment, more pain? I sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to say it. I am tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that comes from decades of bending without ever asking to be held. I had bent for 24 years. I bent when Richard left. I bent when the bills came and I didn't know how to pay them. I bent when Elodie rolled her eyes at her thrift store clothes. I bent when Niels talked down to me in my own home. And the problem with bending too long is that eventually, you forget how to stand. But that night, somewhere between the pie and the silence, I remembered. I stood. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to give them the money. Not because I didn't love them, but because I finally remembered to love myself. I folded the statement, placed it back in the drawer, and closed it with both hands. Not as a hiding place, but as a boundary. A promise. That was the night I stopped calling my sacrifices love. Because love, real love, doesn't demand that you disappear. Love doesn't call you a helper. Love doesn't forget who made it possible in the first place. I would still cook. I would still smile. I would still be their mother. But I would no longer be their doormat. 750. Zero would not buy their house. It would buy me back. The next morning, something felt different. The air in the house had shifted lighter somehow. No one had cleaned. The dishes were still in the sink. But the weight in my chest had lifted. As if that quiet decision, the night before, had untied a knot. I didn't know, had been there for decades. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, not out of habit, but as a choice. The same table where I used to plan budgets and research index funds now became the place where I began sketching out my own life. Mine. Not Elodie's. Not Niels's. Mine. I took a pen and notepad from the drawer and wrote one question at the top of the page. What would I do if I wasn't afraid to live for myself? The answer surprised me. I'd buy a small house near the ocean. Nothing extravagant. Just something with a view of the waves and a little balcony where I could drink morning coffee and watch the sun melt into the sea. I'd finally travel Italy. France. Maybe Greece? Places I had only seen in magazines at the hair salon. I'd learn Italian not because it was useful, but because it was beautiful. I'd take a painting class. Or photography. Or maybe pottery. Something messy and joyful and completely unnecessary. And then I'd renovate my kitchen not for guests. Not for entertaining, but because I deserved to cook in a space that made me smile. For the first time in years. I wasn't thinking in terms of what makes sense or what would Elodie approve of. I was thinking in terms of wonder. Joy. Freedom. I flipped the page and made a second list. Things I've postponed for other people. That list was longer. Vacations. Health checkups. New clothes. Concerts I said no to. Books I never bought because they were too expensive. Haircuts. I stretched out too long. Friendships. I let fade because I was always on call for someone else. I looked at the number again. 750. Ling. That money could buy them a house. Or it could buy me a life. And for once, I didn't feel selfish for saying that out loud. Later that morning, Elodie called. Again. Hey Mom. What time are you coming by? We need to move the winter stuff to Neil's parents' place before lunch. No, can you? No, do you feel up to it? Just the same old script. I stared at the phone. Let it ring. And when it stopped, I typed out a text. Sorry. I can't today. I have things to do. The reply came instantly. What things? This is your day off. That was the moment I realized she didn't see me as a woman with her own schedule. Her own desires. Her own life. She saw me as a tool. An extra set of hands. A background character in her story. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and started browsing coastal real estate listings. A modest 2-bedroom condo in Santa Barbara with an ocean view caught my eye. 580. Ling. Within reach. Especially if I sold my current home. I bookmarked it. Then I opened another tab. Language courses. At the community college. Evening Italian class. Beginner level. Twice a week. No prerequisites. I enrolled on the spot. I didn't even hesitate. In the afternoon, I drove to the mall. Bought a suitcase with wheels that actually worked. Comfortable walking shoes. A few light clothes that made me feel like someone who belonged on a cobblestone street in Florence. It wasn't a splurge. It was an investment in me. That night, I made dinner just for myself. No one to criticize the seasoning. No one to ask for soy sauce or larger wine glasses. I lit a candle. Just because I liked the flicker. And as I sat there eating, alone but not lonely, I realized something. This was what peace looked like. Not silence that screamed, but silence that soothed. Not emptiness, but space. Space to dream again. Space to breathe. Space to remember that I was not born just to serve others. I was born to live. It was a Tuesday evening when the phone rang again. I was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of soup. For once, I was cooking without rush, without pressure, just for myself. I looked at the screen. LOD. I could already picture the tone upbeat. Maybe a little forced. She'd start with something casual and charming, then slide into a request. I answered anyway. "Mom," she said brightly, "guess what? Niels and I went to see that house in East Lake again, you know. The one I told you about." I kept stirring. "They're willing to drop the price a little. The sellers are moving out of state. We can get it for $820. Oh, zero instead of $850. Ling. That's nice." I replied calmly. "It's more than nice. Mom. It's perfect. 3 bedrooms. A little backyard. A 2-car garage. The kitchen has this big island, you'd love it. We already picked out where the Christmas tree would go." She kept talking. About the neighborhood. The fireplace. The en-suite bathroom. The neighbors who worked in tech and design. It sounded like a dream she was already living in. Finally, her voice slowed and lowered. "So, I wanted to talk to you about something. You remember we said we might need help with the down payment? There it was." I set the spoon down gently and leaned against the counter. "We're a little short," she continued. "The bank approved the mortgage, but we need about $225. Zero total with closing costs and a buffer." I said nothing. She added quickly, "I mean, you have the savings. And this is a good investment. For the future. For our family." I waited. I breathed. And then I said it. "I'm not giving you the money." LOD. The silence on the other end was immediate and thick. What I said? No. "I won't be giving you the money for the house." She laughed nervously. "Wait, are you serious? Is this a joke?" "I'm completely serious." "Why? I don't understand. Do you need the money for something else? Are you sick?" "I'm not sick." I said evenly. "I've simply decided to use my money for myself." Another pause. Then her voice sharpened. "Mom, are you being serious right now? We're your family. We've already started the paperwork with the sellers. We were counting on you, and that's the problem." I replied, "You were counting on something you never asked for." Her voice cracked. "So you're just abandoning us? I raised you. I paid for your education. I supported you in every way I could. But you're not a child anymore. LOD. You and Niels have jobs. You're married. This is your responsibility." She grew quiet. When she spoke again, her voice was trembling with anger. "I can't believe how selfish you're being. After everything we've done for you." I laughed softly, sadly. "What exactly have you done for me? We include you in everything. We have you over. We let you be part of our life. You let me cook. You let me clean. You let me be convenient. You never ask how I'm doing. You don't even listen when I talk. That's not true. LOD. The last time you were in this house, you and Niels spent an hour insulting my cooking. My home. My life, as if I wasn't sitting right there." She went silent again. "If I give you this money, what changes?" I continued. Do I suddenly matter? Or do I just become more useful? I didn't realize we were being hurtful. You weren't just being hurtful. You were being disrespectful. A long breath on the other end. So what, this is revenge? No. I said. This is clarity. Her voice cracked again. I thought you loved me. I do. I said softly. That's why I spent 24 years sacrificing everything for you. But love doesn't mean erasing myself. More silence. Then, cold and small. Fine. I hope you enjoy your money. Click. The call ended. I looked at my phone. Set it face down. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I finished my soup, poured a glass of wine, and sat down at the table. For the first time, I had chosen myself. And it felt right. 3 weeks passed. The phone rang many times. I didn't answer. Elodie left messages. Some pleading. Some angry. Some quiet with guilt. Once, she even came to the door. I watched from the window as she paced the porch. Knocked. Rang the bell. Looked through the side glass. I didn't move. Eventually, she left a handwritten letter in the mailbox. It said they'd lost the house. That they had to settle for something smaller. In a less ideal neighborhood. That she couldn't believe I'd become so cold. That she didn't recognize me anymore. But I did. For the first time in years, I recognized myself. Since that night, I had begun rebuilding my life, not the one wrapped around others, but one shaped by my own hands, heart, and hunger. I enrolled in the beginner's Italian course at the community college. Twice a week. I sat among people decades younger than me. At first, I felt like a misplaced library book, too old, too quiet, too out of place. But the professor, a bright-eyed woman from Milan, treated us all the same. She taught with joy. I followed with curiosity. We learned phrases about family, food, and home. When my turn came to speak, I said simply, Mi chiamo Gloria. Ho una figlia. Lei abita a San Diego. My name is Gloria. I have a daughter. She lives in San Diego. I didn't need to say more. No one asked. No one probed. It felt enough. After class one day, I walked into a travel agency down the street. I hadn't stepped into one of those in over 20 years. The walls were covered in posters of Tuscan hills, Venetian canals, and seaside villages in Cinque Terre. A woman about my age greeted me with a warm smile. Her name was Carol. She had been to Italy 3 times and spoke with the conviction of someone who truly loved travel. We sat down for an hour as she helped me plan my dream trip. 3 weeks across northern Italy, Rome, Florence, Venice, Lake Como. I said yes to it all. I paid the deposit and walked out of that office with a stack of printed itineraries and a heart full of anticipation. That evening, I made dinner for myself again. Just me. A quiet meal. No corrections. No requests. I lit a candle not for ambiance, but for peace. I had never known how still and sacred a kitchen could feel until it belonged only to me. Over the following days, I bought a new suitcase, good shoes, lightweight clothes for walking along Italian streets. I even booked a haircut. A real one with layers and care and time. At home. I pulled out the old sofa that Niels once called shabby and replaced it with something soft and new. I painted the walls a lighter shade, changed the curtains, and opened the windows to spring. One morning, as I stood in my updated living room sipping coffee, I felt it. Not regret. Not bitterness. Just freedom. The kind that doesn't scream or announce itself. The kind that breathes. The kind that says, "You are allowed." I was allowed to change. To dream. To begin again at 65. The mailbox held another letter from Elodie a week later. Shorter this time. She missed me. She said she was sorry. That maybe she hadn't appreciated all I had done. I didn't respond. Not yet. Forgiveness. Like trust. Takes time. I folded the letter and placed it beside my bank statement in the drawer. 750. Zero still sat in my account. But it wasn't just money anymore. It was memory. It was possibility. It was the power to rewrite a story I once thought was already finished. I would go to Italy. I would learn new words. I would eat alone in piazzas and smile at strangers. I would send postcards not to ask for permission, but to say I made it? Because in the end, I hadn't just saved money. I had saved myself.